resolution say, in theory, I support this. Pass a law. That's what we want. A law that actually changes the reality, where something actually happens. That's government's job, is to actually make change. Make change. You're in a position to make change. Make change. Use this moment to galvanize public support. Use that outrage to actually make a change. And have the intelligence to say what changes you actually want. Otherwise, it's just screaming into the wind if you don't know exactly what changes we need to make. And we have to be smart in this moment. The violence in these protests obscures the righteousness of the message. The people who are exploiting the situation, the looting, that's not protesting. That's not righteous indignation. That's criminality. And it plays into the hands of the people and the forces that don't want to make the changes in the first place. Because then they get to dismiss the entire effort. I'll tell you what they're going to say. They're going to say the first thing the president said when this happened. They're going to say, these are looters. Remember when the president put out that incendiary tweet? We start shooting when they start looting, or they start looting, we start shooting. That's an old 60s call. The violence, the looting, the criminality plays right into those people who don't want progressive change. And you mark my words, they're going to say today, oh, you see, they're criminals. They're looters. Did you see what they did, breaking the store windows and going in and stealing? And they're going to try to paint this whole protest movement that they're all criminals, they're all looters. That's what they're going to do. Why? Because they don't want to talk about Mr. Floyd's death. They don't want people seeing that video. They want people seeing the video of the looting. And when people see the video of the looting, they say, oh yeah, that's scary. They're criminals. No. Look at the video of the police officer killing Mr. Floyd. That's the video we want people watching. Now, I don't even believe it's the protesters. I believe there are people who are using this moment and using the protest for their own purpose. There are people who want to sow the seeds of anarchy, who want to disrupt. By the way, there are people who want to steal. And here's a moment that you can use this moment to steal. You can use this moment to spread chaos. I hear the same thing from all the local officials. They have people in their communities who are there to quote unquote protest. They're not from their community. They don't know where they're from. Extremist groups. Some people are going to blame the left. Some people will blame the right. It'll become politicized. But there's no doubt there are outside groups that come in to disrupt. There is no doubt that there are people who just use this moment to steal. Why, is it a coincidence that they broke into a Rolex watch company? That was a coincidence? High-end stores? Chanel? That was a coincidence? That was random? That was not random. So, can you have a legitimate protest movement hijacked? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And there are people and forces who will exploit that moment. And I believe that's happening. But we still have to be smart. And at the same time, we have a fundamental issue, which is we just spent 93 days limiting behavior, closing down, no school, no business, thousands of small businesses destroyed. People will have lost their jobs. People wiped out their savings. And now, mass gatherings with thousands of people in close proximity? 1 week before we're going to reopen New York City? What sense does this make? Control the spread, control the spread, control the spread. We don't even know the consequence for the COVID virus of those mass gatherings. We don't even know. We won't know possibly for weeks the nature of the virus. How many super spreaders were in that crowd? Well, they were mostly young people. How many young people went home and kissed their mother hello, or shook hands with their father, or hugged their father, or their grandfather, or their grandmother, or their brother, or their sister, and spread a virus? New York City opens next week. It took us 93 days to get here. Is this smart? New York tough. We went from the worst situation to reopening. From the worst situation to 54 deaths in 50 days. We went from the worst situation to reopening in 93 days. We did that because we were New York tough. New York tough was smart. We were smart. We were smart for 93 days. We were united. We were respectful of each other. We were disciplined. Wearing the mask, it's just discipline. It's just discipline. Remembering to put it on, remembering to pick it up, remembering to put it on when you see someone, it's just discipline. But it was also about love. We did it because we love one another. That's what a community is. We love one another. And yes, you can be loving even in New York, even with the New York toughness, even with the New York accent, even with the New York swagger. We're loving. And that's what we've done for 93 days, in a way we've never done it before. Never in my lifetime. Never in my lifetime has this city and this state come together in the way we have. I don't think it ever will again in my lifetime. Now you can say maybe it takes a global pandemic for it to happen. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. And I don't know that the power of what it was like when it came together might not be so beautiful that people want to do it again. Remember when we all acted together during coronavirus and we rallied and we knocked coronavirus on its rear end? Remember when we all wore masks and we all had that hand sanitizer? Remember what we did? Wow. When we come together, we can do anything. And it's true. It's true for a state, it's true for a nation. When you come together and you have one agenda, you can do anything. You want to change society? You want to end the tale of two cities? You want to make it one America? You can do that. Just the way you knocked coronavirus on its rear end. People united can do anything. We showed that. We just showed that the past 93 days. We can end the injustice and the discrimination and the intolerance and the police abuse. We have to be smart. And we have to be smart right now. right now in this state. And we have to be smart tonight in this city. Because this is not advancing a reform agenda. This is not persuading government officials to change. This is not helping end coronavirus. We have to be smart. Questions?
Governor, do you think this is, the NYPD tactics have in any way exacerbated tensions here? I think you'd probably agree things hit a new level with the widespread looting we saw last night. Have you lost confidence in the city's ability to handle this crisis? There's obviously not a communication that's effective between the protesters and the NYPD. Do you need to call in the National Guard, impose a curfew? And secondly, do you think the repeal of 50A will go a long way toward healing?
A few things, Zach. First, I think this has been counterproductive for New York City in many ways. We're battling the coronavirus. We had a lot of people who are New York City people move out during this. We're 1 week away from reopening. We're looking to revitalize New York City, get people back, get businesses back. We're going forward. What they saw on TV the past couple of nights is not helpful to that, number one. Number two, in terms of how New York City is handling it, you're right, there was looting, there was criminality. People have seen that. That's very destructive on a number of levels. As I said, it reduces the credibility of the protests in the first place. Will allow the critics to now say they're all criminals and try to color the whole protest with the looting to change the image from the real issue, which was Mr. Floyd's death, to now the looting. The critics will do that. They'll start today, full-throated. We haven't articulated what the protests are about besides just unhappiness, outrage. We haven't said, this is what we want done. Government, this is what we want. Here is the agenda. That's all true. I'm going to be speaking to the mayor today about a curfew. We've done it in other cities. In New York, it has worked better. Curfew is not a silver bullet, by the way. But obviously, last night was not good. So what can we do differently? What can we do better? I'm going to speak to the mayor about a curfew. We have the National Guard on standby. I've told mayors all across the state that I can call out the National Guard. New York City should have enough personnel with the NYPD. It's one of the largest police forces in the country. And it's taxpayers pay a lot of money for the NYPD. I don't know that it's a manpower, person power issue, but if it is, we have the National Guard who are also trained to do this. I think some of the actions of the NYPD have exacerbated the anger. There are videos of some NYPD actions that are very disturbing. There are videos of NYPD cars driving into a crowd that are very disturbing, pulling a mask down off a person to pepper spray them, throwing a woman to the ground. It's on video. It's on video. The looting is on video, yeah. So is NYPD activity on video. I asked the Attorney General for a report. I want that report done 30 days from when I asked her, which was 2 days ago. But I'm going to speak to the mayor about, in the meantime, what is the response to those police actions on video, right? Doesn't mean you have to send the police officer out there tomorrow after these actions. I understand we have to review them. I understand the law. If I was just Andrew Cuomo from Queens, it would be simple. I would say that guy should be fired. drives the car into a crowd, he should be fired. That's what Andrew Cuomo in Queens says. As governor, there's law, there's processes, there's going to be lawsuits, I get it. So the Attorney General review, yes, but doesn't mean you do nothing in the interim. So I'm going to be speaking to the mayor about that. But there's no doubt that this situation has done a lot of damage on a lot of levels and has not advanced the cause of the protesters, which I agree with. I believe, look, you've watched my administration. I am frustrated perpetually by how difficult it is to make changes. I am perpetually frustrated about how hard it is to get that political machine, that governmental machine, to turn. It's like a big freighter coming down the river. And you can take the rudder and turn it all the way to one side. But the freighter has such a mass in and of itself that it just continues on its course and slowly starts to turn. I battle that every day. So I look for moments where the people can actually rise up to make changes, so the government officials say, oops, we better do something. Oops. Because the easiest thing to do is always nothing. It's the easiest thing to do. The old expression, the legislator who does nothing wrong, right? Every action on a big problem is controversial. It's easier to do nothing. Then you don't get criticized. And when they say, well, why did you do this? Well, I wanted to, but I couldn't because. So I look for moments to overcome the inertia, to overcome the status quo. Marriage equality, guns, minimum wage. Every one of those things they talked about for decades. But when the people rose up, I was there to use the power of the people. I believe there's a moment here to use the power of the people to get things done. So I said from day one, I'm with them. I am with them. But even that has to be smart, right? You remember how we focused people on passing gun reform and what the bill actually looked like, right? Because the devil's in the details. You have to write a bill. What do you mean gun reform? What is gun reform to you? Okay, we're mad about Mr. Floyd. We should be. And we're mad about the whole litany. We should be. And here's what we want, XYZ. We have not been effective targeting the popular energy. And we should be. So I'm frustrated at that. And then I believe you're going to have people who don't want change. So they're going to look to distract and discredit this moment. And the looting and those things will play right into their hands. Because this will all become about looters now. This will become, they'll try to make it all about criminality, which I believe was a perversion of the protest. I believe there were outside people who exploited the opportunity of the protest. Because look, all across the state, we had police officers taking a knee in unity with the protesters. By the way, there is no police officer who's going to defend what happened to Mr. Floyd. They're not. And there is no police officer who doesn't want to have a good relationship with the community. And if there is, they shouldn't be a police officer. It's that simple. But this was just negative. It was not advancing a positive reform agenda. It was bad for the city. It was bad in the efforts to battle COVID. It was bad for our efforts to be ramping up towards the reopening, right? I said last week, this week was about focusing on the hospitals, focusing on the hotspot areas in the outer borough, and start ramping up the MTA for the reopening. Here we are. We're coming back. Celebrate the accomplishment. What a beautiful accomplishment. We don't even appreciate how beautiful it is because we're not really there yet. But when you get on the other side of this, when you start to reopen next week and you look back, we handled the global pandemic in one of the most dense cities that had the highest number of infections, 100 days. And you know, in retrospect, the 100 days doesn't even look that long, right? 3 months. Now, going through it was hell. Get it? I've been in hell. We've all been in hell. But in retrospect, global pandemic, 100 days in this city with this diversity, beautiful. Mr. Sif?
Question about the risk of new COVID cases as a result of these gatherings, and maybe we can get Dr. Zucker to weigh in as well. Is it mitigated at all by the fact that these folks are outdoors? And if you don't see a spike in a couple of weeks after all of these people out there, does that perhaps tell you something that Italian doctors have begun to speculate on, that in some small way COVID has become a tiny bit less lethal?
I'll ask the doctor to answer, but let me just, the outside is a good fact. The younger people is a good fact. The best fact is we have already gotten the infection rate down. See, that's the best fact. The best fact is we did 50,000 tests yesterday with only 1,000 positives. So a lower percentage of those people out there last night were infected. If that happened 60 days ago, Andrew, forget it. Because more people would have been infected. When we were going through it this morning, the only good news is with that low infection rate, there were not that many people infected. And in a really cruel irony, many of them were actually wearing masks. But, Dr. Yarborough.
I would echo the governor's words that the infection rate is down, but as much as we say that we support peaceful protests, the bottom line is we do want to push the public health message that people should wear masks as the people were wearing masks, that they should try to social distance themselves as much as possible. And as much as emotions are high, we as the governor has said we need to be smart, and being smart means hand sanitizer, keeping a distance, and doing the best you can to socially distance.
Do you expect to see a spike based on the images you've seen?
I'm concerned about that, and we're going to track those numbers because when you gather a lot of people together, as we've always said, that is a concern. So we're looking at this, and we're going to keep a very a close eye on every day.
Governor, if we see infections go up, it seems like people are done with distancing the masks. You go out, you see it. Can you go back? And what concerns do you have about that?
Can you go back? Yes. Many places have gone back. That's why we use these global experts. You know, what they keep saying to me is there are many, many, many examples of opening too fast, and not just opening too fast, but the discipline comes down.
I'm talking about the public.
I understand what you're saying. There are many examples of that. And if you start to overwhelm the hospitals again, you have to close again. You can't allow, where were we? That was the real danger point. People dying because they don't get medical attention. That was the Italy situation. You die on a gurney in a hallway because the doctors and the nurses are too busy. It overwhelmed the hospital system. That's what we were looking at. We were in danger of overwhelming the health system. If that happens, you have to close again. You'd have to. Well, people won't listen. Well, then you'd have a phenomenal death rate and an international crisis. Now, again, the only good news is the infection rate was already so low. We wouldn't be reopening next Monday. We're 1 week from reopening. If this had to happen, this was the best time for it to happen since this whole thing has started, because the infection rate is down. Second positive factor is they were younger people. There were not a lot of 65-year-olds in the crowd, the best I could tell. But those are two positive factors. And many people were wearing masks, which was also a positive factor. So those are the positives.
Would you suggest people not go out and protest?
No, I think you can protest, but do it smartly and intelligently, and many places have. You look at places around the country, there were protests all across the country. Protest, just be smart about it. With this virus, you can do many things now as long as you're smart about it. Right? You can reopen, you can go into a store, you can do a lot of things. Just be smart.
So what's the difference between protesting and a business, say in the city, who wants to reopen smartly, if it's not at the phase yet that they're technically allowed to?
Well, that's where we're at, but it has to be a business where you can be smart. Be smart meaning socially distant. You don't conduct business in a way where you have people within 6 feet. You have to wear the mask. You have to do the hand sanitizer. That's where we're going to be.
So is that okay then for businesses in the city if
Well,
they
we're
can do
starting
that?
in phase 1 because, remember, you have congregate situations that you have to account for. It's not that people come from a helicopter and go into a business, right? People get on a bus, people get on a subway, people are on a sidewalk. That's where all these things are difficult. If you could just parachute into a business on Fifth Avenue, it'd be a different story.
So follow up on the Friday briefing, you said that we don't have a public hospital system, and then you announced the surge and flex approach. If you can elaborate that, since we have the commissioner here, and also a follow up on the community, Albanian American community is interested in the medical data, more specifically the death number of Albanians in the state. If you have that, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, you did say that Friday. Did we get that number yet?
So it's actually not broken out that way. The way the hospitals report, they report Caucasian, African American, Hispanic, Asian, and other. What we've asked the health department to do, following your question on Friday, is if there's a way to go back and discuss with the specific hospitals and see if there's a way to break down that number further. And we're working on that right now.
In terms of the hospitals, people didn't this is one of the lessons, right? Lessons learned from this terrible situation. Our public health system, we all talk about a public health system. Yeah, except there really is no public health system. Where is the public health system? Well, the hospitals. Hospitals are not a public health system. The mayor talks about a public health system because there is a system called H&H, Health and Hospitals, which are 11 hospitals in New York City. Those are 11 public hospitals that the city runs. Though the 11 hospitals that the mayor controls are nowhere near the ability to manage a health problem in the city. There are 100 hospitals in the New York City area, but they're private, and they've never really worked together. You know, NYU Langone is one hospital, Columbia Presbyterian is another hospital, Northwell is another hospital, and they're separate hospitals. They don't share patients, they don't share material, they don't share resources, they're separate individual hospitals. What we were forced to do, because when you have a public health crisis, let's say New York City, you can't just say to those 11 hospitals, you handle it. Those 11 hospitals are battling every day just to deal with what they deal with. The first crisis we had was at Elmhurst, which was one of the public hospitals. We need those 100 private hospitals. Now, they're technically regulated by the state, but the state has never said to those private hospitals, I need you to respond to a public crisis, and I need you to allow us to coordinate operation of your hospital. That never happened before. We instituted that immediately in the middle of this situation, after we saw some hospitals getting overwhelmed, right? Elmhurst gets overwhelmed as a hospital. All right, Elmhurst. First, there are 10 other public hospitals. How do we distribute patients among those 10 publics? And if the publics can't handle it, because there's only 11, then we have to figure out how to get these 100 privates to actually operate as a system. That's what we call surge and flex. First, I said to all of them, you all have to increase your capacity 50%. They said, what? I said, yes. You have to increase your capacity 50%. You have 100 hospital beds, you have to have 150. That was the surge. And then we increased the capacity. Then we said to them, and by the way, when one of you gets overwhelmed, or one of you doesn't have the staff, or one of you doesn't have the PPE, or one of you doesn't have enough reagents, we're going to share among and coordinate among all 100 private hospitals. And by the way, those 11 publics also. That had never been done before. And when you talk about a worst case scenario is you exceed your hospital capacity. What is your hospital capacity? Your hospital capacity is theoretically, if you maximize all 100 hospitals and shifted the patient burden so they were all at 100%. And every hospital was at 100% capacity. That's your maximum capacity. That had never been thought of. And that's what we developed during the coronavirus, but we did it very quickly, and we're now codifying that and refining that. Because it's also very disruptive to the private hospitals.
Governor, you said you're going to be discussing with the mayor the possibility of curfew. Can you clarify whether that's something you actually are inclined to support and forward? And likewise, you said the National Guard is somewhat on standby. As you assess the situation here over the past few nights, the way those tactics have worked or not worked in Minneapolis and elsewhere, can you give us more of a sense of what you need to see and what you plan to activate when?
Look, I think Governor Walz in Minneapolis did a good job last night. I think they got caught initially, which is understandable, but I think he did a good job. Many cities use a curfew. Again, people will argue both ways. But my basic point is, last night was bad, right? The criminality, the looting was the most egregious. The people exploiting the circumstance. There is an anger, because I hear about it, from people who say, we saw the police officer on tape in Minneapolis. We have police officers in New York City who didn't do anything like what we've seen other police officers do, but it's seriously questionable behavior. The video of the car driving into the crowd, the video of the pepper spray after removing the mask, the woman getting thrown, that is apparently egregious conduct. And nothing has been done. Now, I feel comfortable saying the Attorney General is looking at it and we'll get a report. And it's only 30 days, this is not kick the can. And if that report says, whatever that report says, I will do, right? But in the interim, nothing has been done. I get that too. and I'm going to speak to the mayor about that. The National Guard we have on standby. They are trained to do this. But I don't know that it's a person power issue in New York City. In Minneapolis, it was a person power. They just don't have a police force large enough to handle it. I don't know that that is the situation. I don't know that the NYPD isn't big enough. I don't think that's the problem.
But are you inclined to ask for or strongly suggest a curfew or
Look, I could
use your
impose a
authority?
curfew. Yeah, legally I can impose a curfew. So I'm not at that point, but I know something has to be done because last night was not acceptable and the night before was not acceptable on any level.
A quick follow-up on 50A, and just to clarify your position, whether you support amending it, repealing it altogether. The mayor said they want to, mayor and then NYPD said they want to amend it, but sort of maintain some of the 50A restrictions on access to disciplinary records. Reformers say the state essentially can already sufficiently shield officers' personal information. What's your position? Amend, appeal, leave alone?
Look, my position is what I said in a council's letter to New York City and the other local governments. I don't believe today 50A stops them from releasing disciplinary records. Today, I don't believe the law does it. I said to the mayors across the city, 50A does not stop you from releasing disciplinary records. I said that to every mayor. I gave them a legal opinion that said the law doesn't apply. Now, if a mayor wanted to release the records, you know what they would do? Release the records and say, I have a governor's council opinion that says the law doesn't say I can't release them. That's what that's what any mayor would do, right? Mayors all day long take positions against my interpretation of the law. Here, I said, the law doesn't say that. Release the records. They haven't released the records because politically they don't want to. Because the police don't want the records released, which I understand their position. But if a person is being investigated, you're not going to tell me what their past disciplinary results were? And by the way, if they're not bad, then release them to help the person and exonerate the person. But I don't believe the law ever stopped the mayor from releasing it. I believe politically they didn't want to. So now, use the moment. Either release the records because the law doesn't stop you, or if that's not enough, then the legislature should repeal the law.
If it's not a manpower.
By the way, excuse me one second. Remember, New York City used to release the records with the same law. The law didn't change. How did you used to be able to do it with 50A, but now all of a sudden you can't do it because of 50A? How does that make any sense? I did it for many years, and 50A was in existence. Then all of a sudden they decided they can't do it because of 50A. I give them a legal opinion that says you can do it, just like you used to do it. And the law doesn't stop it. Come on.
If it's not manpower, what is it then? It sounds like you're questioning police tactics.
And that's what I want to talk to the mayor about.
Do you think they've been up to the task?
I think what happened last night was not good. I think some of the police activity on videos have inflamed the community. I believe the protesters have been infiltrated by people with their own motives, and the protests have been exploited. There's criminality that some people have used this moment to pursue. So there's a lot going on. But I understand that. But we have to do something different because this is not acceptable.
If you do impose a curfew, how exactly is that enforced? And then what is your message to these businesses who they've been destroyed the last few nights to them and to New Yorkers who don't feel safe. Even police officers who said, this is like a war zone, I've never experienced
Yeah,
this.
that's why it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable for anyone. It's not acceptable for anyone. So it's not, there are no sides here. Last night was bad for everyone. It was bad for business owners. It was bad for the police. It's bad for the community. It's bad for everyone. And it accomplishes nothing because we're losing the moment. And we're not even making the political point that the protesters want to make, which is a good point. Tale of two cities. My father said in 1984. This is 2020. Thank you very much, guys.
Said that the governor should send the military to put down the protest.
In 60 years, we went from about 100,000 factory workers to probably about 7,000.
Off in the distance, you can see some factories that are still humming, but most of them are just kind of abandoned.
The restaurant industry right now is one of the largest and fastest growing industries in America. And yet it continues to be the absolute lowest paying employer in the United States.
Barely anybody's making enough to live.
You were donating plasma to get by.
It's literally a slave wage.
I don't remember growing up like this. My mom didn't have to go to food banks. It's pretty sad.
How do we put this in perspective about how worried we should be?
We're going to share the newest numbers and critical information on the outbreak. Vladimir Dutya.
We're going to take you over to Minnesota now, where the governor, Tim Walz, is speaking. Let's listen in.
And that is what I think, that's one of the exciting things in the midst of all this. You can feel a sense of optimism coming back. I just want to say, you'll hear from some of the things in the updates where we're at. I don't want to paint a picture that this is over, but I do want to paint a picture that I think we as Minnesotans have regrounded ourselves in the values that we care about. It looks to me like there's a clear delineation between the folks who are rightfully pained and angered, wanting to see change and expressing it in lawful ways, and what we witnessed on several days earlier in the week, those that are bent on wanton destruction of the very communities that are most pained. I think as citizens, as residents of Minnesota, we can continue to maintain that, and this gives us a space now for a time of unprecedented opportunity to address things that have been around in many cases decades or since the founding or prior to that. So in moving forward and in that light, I want to talk a little bit about the posture we're in terms of law enforcement on the streets. I signed an executive order in consultation and leadership with the mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul. We will be extending the curfew for 2 days, but the times will change. It will go from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. And one of the reasons in this is Minnesotans have taken charge of this. The only way these things work is what we've seen the last 2 nights. The vast majority of people abide by this. Those that not are able to address this. I do want to mention something. Some of you witnessed this on many of your stations and live TV. There were protesters that stayed out past the curfew. I think in some cases because of the tragic near miss with the truck, it disrupted some of their schedules. Some of them, I think, were very intent on going home and doing that because it was very clear. They were articulating very clearly the peaceful right to demonstrate, but they also understood once they got out past that time, the interaction with the police that some of you witnessed, and it was gratifying, I think, to see how citizens approached it and how our law enforcement approached it. The very humanized way, the very orderly way that people were processed and treated, and some of the interactions between the two to understand each other was, for me, the way I think people expect this to happen. So that curfew will go in place. We'll also think about the strategic levels of what we have. I will have General Jensen will be speaking about a transition to our National Guard troops back to their homes and their jobs, because that's what they are. They take time out of their jobs, and many of them will be going back, some of them working as news reporters, some of them working as camera operators, some of them working as teachers. That will begin to happen, and that will be done, as General Jensen will talk about, in a very orderly and